I am really thrilled to welcome Alisa Valdés-Rodríguez. And I'm just going to go ahead and read this introduction, and then we'll hear from her. She's a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of 16 books with more than 1 million copies in print and translations in 11 languages. Her debut novel, which I've read, The Dirty Girls Social Club, became a cultural phenomenon, and she continues to push boundaries, no kidding, in 2025 with 3 new releases: Where Rabbits Gathered, which is historical fiction, My Somewhere Else, a memoir, and Cry, YA paranormal. Before turning to fiction, Alisa was a staff writer at the Boston Globe and the Los Angeles Times, where she covered music, policy, and culture. She is incredibly prolific, authoring 4 Substack newsletters ranging from astute and historically informed political analysis and commentary to the intensely personal exploration of a near-death experience and its aftermath. Alisa lives in Belen, New Mexico, where her roots run 13 generations deep on her mother's side, and where she's currently raising dogs, growing ideas, and putting green chili on everything worth loving. A woman after my own heart. Thank you so much for coming down here to talk with us.
Thank you. I love that introduction. It was beautiful. That was the best introduction I've ever got. Thank you. So yeah, I've got 3 books out this year. But I'm going to read to you from the one that's actually out now. I have a few copies. I'm feeling less bad now about the fact that my order didn't arrive in time to bring lots of copies. But thank you for coming here, and it's really a beautiful space, and I'm so glad you guys have these events. It's really wonderful. I'm going to read to you from this book, Where Rabbits Gathered. This is the first book that I published through my own independent publishing house. I've been with many of the major publishers: St. Martin's Press, Little Brown, HarperCollins, Harper Teen, and Penguin. But now I wanted to just give this a go, because this book is not in what my literary agent or editors would think is my brand. So you get very much, especially there's a curse to success to some extent in the publishing industry, which is, especially if you're kind of someone who's interested in a lot of different things and don't like to be put into a little box, as I am. They want you to kind of keep writing in the same genre. And this is very much in traditional thinking's mindset, not in my genre, which is contemporary commercial fiction and thrillers. I write thrillers too, and young adults. I've pushed boundaries with that, but historical fiction, for some reason, like if it happened a long time ago, it's supposed to be really, really different than now. But as I approached this, I tried to think of I'm a big fan of Eckhart Tolle, and so he teaches about the power of now, that the past does not exist and the future does not exist. All we ever have at any point in time is right now. And so when I approached writing historical fiction, I did not think of it in sepia tones. I did not try to think of it as being far in the past. I tried to think of it as the now that was then, So that was, I wanted it to feel contemporary. I wanted the characters to feel very normal in the book, in a way. My inspiration for this book, I will mention because it's a bit relevant for where you guys live here. When the Oppenheimer movie came out, everybody was talking about it. And I remember reading a preview of it in the New York Times that talked about how when Oppenheimer founded the labs, he found a patch of land that became Los Alamos that was empty. Now, that's not true. That patch of land wasn't empty. There were people living there for 20,000 years, 15,000 years maybe, And on my Spanish side, my family lived there in that area as well. And not only that, but the film itself didn't really talk about the Downwinders. And my mother grew up in Berlin, in a town called Bosque. It's about 17 miles south of Berlin. And she was 18 months old when the bomb went off, down here. And the cloud went up and went over and rained on their farm. My mom grew up on a farm. She's from ranching, farming, rural people. And of the 21 girls in her graduating high school class in Berlin, 17 had leukemia. My mother has had thyroid cancer, had to have her thyroid removed. We just 9 years ago found a meningioma, which is a brain tumor the size of an orange in her left frontal lobe that had been growing since she was a child because of radiation. So my mom's a wonderful writer and poet. She actually copy edited this book for me. So it's kind of family business. But the Oppenheimer movie was very well done, but it tells a limited story of what happened here. And I think it glosses over the people like my family who's been here forever and who were harmed and never compensated. Every other state has compensated. Nevada has compensated their victims of radiation. Somehow in New Mexico, we don't really matter that much. And it tore our family apart because when you have a tumor in your left frontal lobe, that part of your brain, when it gets injured, it turns off things like self-censorship, inhibitions. So her personality completely changed when I was about 11 years old. She became a totally different person. And we didn't know why, until 9 years ago. So that's something I wanted to address all of this. And I did tweet about it back when I was on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter anymore because I don't hate myself deeply. But I thought, you know what I want to do? Rather than just tell people that there have been people living on that patch of land for a really long time, I'm going to show it. And I'm going to show it by using my own family tree, what I know of it, and telling the story of 24 generations of firstborn daughters in the same family. Starting at, I'm not sorry if that's my phone, I will grab it because it's going to be meeting. The book starts in Puye. Have any of you been to the cliff dwellings at Puye outside of Española? They're near Bandelier, similar. The Tewa people who now live in the Santa Clara Pueblo, they initially lived there and then they moved when there was a drought. So we start there in this book right before the Oñate expedition arrives. I'm going to grab that because that is my phone. It's going to drive me nuts. Oh, sorry. I usually have it muted. Okay. Good. My phone. All right. So that's where it starts. I thought I could get through 24 generations of firstborn daughters in one family tree in one book. No, there are 6. So this is going to be 4 volumes, probably. Yeah. And I want to show not just, who lived in that area, but my mom's family, they became anglicized over the years. Their last name is now Conant, and my grandmother was a McGrath. So through our family, I think it can be an interesting way to kind of tell the story of all the different migrations and the reasons that people came to New Mexico and formed families. Really often we're all a mix of a bunch of different things. So I will read to you. I have the dust jacket on upside down. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I should also say, in my other fiction, I've been very plot-oriented because it's commercial, especially with thrillers. You have to be very plot conscious. this book is very Puebloan. And because the family, it takes place from 1580 to 1680. So we start right before Oñate gets here and we end at the Pueblo Revolt starting. And I really wanted to be careful about the mindset that I had in writing the book. And I studied as much as I could Puebloan storytelling traditions and forms, story forms, which are very different. If you've ever read Leslie Marmon Silko or Paula Gunn Allen, like that. And there's also a wonderful book called Tewa Tales. I'm forgetting now the name of the author, but she moved here from somewhere on the East Coast and just took down a lot of the Puebloan stories that people weren't paying attention to. So we're used to the hero's journey, right? Everything in kind of, modern publishing and storytelling in the mainstream US, I would say, culture is that hero's journey. And Joseph Campbell found it all over the world. And there are elements of it in the Puebloan tales, but very often they're very different. And that's because the cosmology is so different. So I really tried to, in the format of the book, to embrace that idea. For instance, in the Tewa language, there's no word for art. And yet every single thing people do is artistic. And it's because art is so deeply, being creative and making things of beauty as a way to honor the creator is so essentially part of just life that there is no need for an extra word for it. And often in, the dominant society in the US that's not Puebloan, I would say, art is very often tied to ego, the artist. You are celebrated as the individual artist and you're associating with your art. And so I had to think a lot about that as a creative person and a writer. I want to write this not to glorify myself, but to be very quiet. I haven't promoted this book very much for that reason. I'm kind of just letting it go out into the world and be what it is and see if it finds its people. Because it feels really crass and strange for me to advertise it. And I know that's probably self-defeating, but it's just the spirit of the book calls for that for me. So what I've done is kind of just drop into each of these daughters' lives and tell just a little bit of the story. And then we go to the next daughter and the next daughter. So you're seeing the Spaniards arrive and all of that. That's kind of on the periphery to some extent. There are horrific things happening, but there are also really beautiful things happening. I wanted to be really mindful and careful too in this time, in this country, not to make something a simple black and white or binary, because I feel like we're doing that and it's tearing us apart. We are being groomed to some extent by our media. I don't care what side of the political spectrum you fall on, and if it's social media or cable or anything. There's money to be made for people in getting you outraged and scared of the, bad other. And we are all doing it. My darling hippie mother is doing it now, but it's, and so I don't want to do that in this book. I don't want to fall into this, everyone on the Spanish side was bad. There was a lot of horrible stuff that happened. And we need to, people who have those roots need to address that and be honest about that. But there were also good people in the book, in history, like a priest who ends up in the book, who's a real guy, who was horrified by what was going on, especially at Acoma, and reported it to Spain and to the king, and eventually got Oñate thrown out of New Mexico for crimes against humanity, So I try to be nuanced about that. And mostly I try to be funny and just normal, because I feel like when people think historical fiction, they're like, oh, this is history was very serious and it's dates and we have to be. Well, it's just people living their lives just like we do now. So it opens. I won't read you the prologue, but I'll tell you what it is. It's about a young man named Son Elk, who is a trader, Trader, not traitor, but trader, who has walked from Puye to Taos, which I'm trying to use the original names, not in. So where rabbits gather is the translation of Puye. Puye means where rabbits gather. And so Taos, the name for Taos was Place of the Red Willows, so I call it Place of the Red Willows in the book. I'm using English to convey what the name actually meant, rather than using a table word. Also, you have to be really careful when using indigenous words in New Mexico to get permission. Because people, the Pueblos and other groups now carefully guard their languages and everything else because of everything that's been done to them. So out of respect, I've only used those words when I was given permission. All right. So he's real cocky. He's young. He does like backflips off of rocks, and he's real handsome. He thinks it's the best thing ever. And he's traveling with two older traders who are his uncles. And it's a sunny day when they're supposed to go back to Puye for his wife is waiting. She's pregnant, expecting their first child. But the elders tell him the sky looks like snow. There's probably gonna be a blizzard, and we should wait it out. And he's like, no. Even if it snows, I'm gonna be fine. He's not fine. So he does end up in a blizzard. He's also very, very sick. He doesn't know it, but we'll find out at the end of the series of books when they discover this mummified person in the cave near Taos in the Rio Grande Gorge, that he had a disease, one of the diseases that were brought from Europe. Even though he hadn't had any contact with Europeans yet, Coronado did get here around 1540 and brought a lot of people, and diseases started spreading at that time. So he is not coming home. So we first meet his wife, who's the first of the daughters, in the next chapter. And this is her chapter. Blue Water, 1580. From afar, the city of Puye was as well camouflaged as a horned lizard amid the stones of a dry riverbed. Up close, its buildings emerged from the pink cliffs seemingly by magic, encircling a mile-long mesa 500 feet up. It had thousands of rooms, some stacked 3 stories high, and thousands of people living in them. Some buildings were modified natural caves. Others had been built on ledges of stone, bricks, and clay. The people traversed the cliffs with the grace and finger strength of squirrels, via intricate footholds carved in patterns their enemies would never know. In the summers, the Tewa lived atop the mesa in a second city they built there. The sun baked the cliff dwellings warm in the winter, but the summer homes were airy structures with open doors and windows. The views extended for hundreds of miles across the vast high desert, south to Sitting Down Mountain, north to Sepu. 4 hard seasons rolled across this enormous river valley in thundering grandeur, proof of a powerful creator concerned with balance and beauty. Most of the caves were multi-purpose one-room homes sectioned together by clan. Most homes had their own hearths for heating and cooking, though many meals were shared with extended families and clans in nearby communal spaces. There were also circular rooms dug into the earth called kivas, where any number of collective activities transpired. When women gave birth, they did so in their homes, or in the homes of other members of the family, or sometimes in private, smaller caves set aside for this sacred purpose. It was in one of these, in the winter village, that Blue Water was enduring her final hour of difficult labor. It was 3 days past the winter solstice. The moon was in a waxing crescent phase, and a wicked snowstorm raged outside. The door was secured with blankets, woven mats, and pellets, and still small puffs of snow found their way in. Blue Water's mother, Green Ear, 29, fed cedar sticks into the fire pit. Smoke rose from the crackling flames and snaked up to the two ventilation holes. The doula, A square, small person named Frog Woman, who was so old no one could remember her age and so wise she knew every story ever told, prepared the cloths, salves, and warm bowls of water. All of these women belonged to the water clan. The fluttering firelight danced Blue Water's agonized shadow across the walls. She stood motionless, her palms pressed into the wall. To distract herself from the pain of a new contraction, she ran through the names of stars and constellations, mouthing the words with her eyes screwed shut, imagining their placement and migrations. She thought, too, of her husband, Son, and Elk. He still wasn't back from his trading trip to the place of the Revolt, though the older two traders had returned last night and seemed dismayed. He'd not come back. Bluewater needed him here to make her laugh with his moon jokes. He dulled the pain of her badly sprained ankle last year by doing backflips and telling ridiculous stories. She'd sprained it while walking a steep, narrow path at dusk on her way home from gathering water at the third creek away with her sisters. Before the drought had come, the women had always been home before dark. But now that they had to venture further to find viable streams or ponds, the water-gathering women were often gone all day and exhausted when they returned. Blue Water had tumbled down the hill, distracted by the magnificent purpling of the sky and its sparkling stars. The large pottery jar she carried on her head showered. Its precious water was absorbed instantly by the earth. The rock that had caught her toe was familiar to her. She walked this path many times. She felt ashamed of her carelessness, but the night sky had hypnotized her. There was no way around the truth of that. They had that kind of power over her and always had. She explained this to the elders, and from that day forward, Blue Water was excused from water carrying. The elders assigned her instead to apprentice with Cloudstick, the astronomer. He reported back that she was a fast learner with a gift for mathematics. He said that despite the association of men with the sun and women with the moon, Blue Water would make a fine replacement for him one day. Not everyone was pleased with this arrangement, but Blue Water wouldn't let that bother her. "It won't be long now," said Frog Woman. Her legs were so bowed the knees seemed to bend to the sides. People guessed her age to be at least 50. Frog Woman had attended Blue Water's own birth as well as her mother's birth. She insisted on wrapping Blue Water in a blanket now, though Blue Water didn't want or need one. Beneath it, she wore only a black cotton manta tied over her right shoulder, and a delicate, simple necklace, a small turquoise rabbit pendant on a thin leather strip. This had been given to her by her own mother, to whom it had been given by her mother, and so on, in honor of this place they called home. Puye and Tewa meant where rabbits gathered. Frogwoman began the prayer for the final stage of labor. Green Ear left the fire to join the midwife at her daughter's side. Blue Water's head lolled exhaustedly between her arms. Sweat glued her dark, square bangs to her forehead. Green Ear wiped Blue Water's face with a cotton cloth. Blue Water's disheveled braids dangled almost to the floor, and her mother folded them gently into shorter bundles, securing them with ribbon. Blue Water was too tired to thank her. A low, loud groan came. Blue Water knew it was her own voice growling, but she had not intentionally made that sound. How did the body sometimes bypass conscious thought to do what it needed? And if the body could do this, was that not proof of a separate soul? For who was bearing witness to this grumbling, this consciousness sufficiently disconnected from the flesh to be surprised by it? She began to sway, trapped in that obliterating kind of pain that reduces a person to oneness with all that is and readies them for the mercy of death. Blue Water had been here before, however, and she had not died, though now, as then, death had seemed inevitable. It seemed impossible that anyone could live through this much pain, and yet she had, twice. This was her third time. This was the third time Blue Water had given birth to the same stubborn spirit. The elder women said you got used to childbirth, that each new baby would be easier than the last, but Blue Water disagreed. The first time she'd given birth, she was 13. The baby girl was born in the autumn with several broken ribs and a snapped collarbone because Blue Water's hips were too narrow. Then, despite the best efforts of the healers, the infant died 2 days later. The second time, the baby girl came 4 months too soon. This was last summer, shortly before the sprained ankle incident, when the monsoon rains failed to come and the people and even the dogs began to starve. The baby fell into her grandmother's maid hands already dead, shriveled like that year's corn stalks in the south field. Blue Water had done as required and buried both babies under the floor beneath her bed, so the soul would be nearby when she got pregnant again. The people of where rabbits gathered had slowly, over the course of 100 years or more, been moving back and forth from this city in the cliffs to their other newer settlement on the west bank of Big River, some 12 miles to the east, as drought slowly made Puye uninhabitable. More and more clans were staying by the river permanently, engineering channels and locks to bring river water to the fields. Blue Water was keen to relocate to the river too, but the spirit in the floor necessitated postponing the move until it could be born and live. I must check you again, said Frog Woman gently with a hand on Blue Water's upper back. Is that all right, my dear? Question annoyed Blue Water. Answering it required more effort than she was able to give. Do what you must, grandmother, said Greenear. The doula was not her biological grandmother. The doula had no children of her own. Rather, the term was used with all older women as a mark of respect. Frogwoman groped beneath Blue Water's manta, and the laboring woman whimpered with the added discomforts. There's the head, said Frogwoman happily. Let gravity help you now. It's time. Blue Water pushed. The terrible fire engulfed her pelvic floor. It flashed like lightning across her thighs. It screamed up her spine. Every bone quaked as the baby slipped out, greasy with blood and fluid, into Greenear's waiting hands. The midwife checked the baby, counting limbs and digits, feeling for broken places with short, knowing fingers that seemed built for nothing else. Satisfied things were well, she wiped the baby clean. The infant sputtered, squawked, and began to cry. Frogwoman placed her on Blue Water's chest and tended to the placenta. She cleaned Blue Water with soap tree yucca root and healing herbs. She checked for ribs and, finding none, placed clean cloth between her legs and declared the birth a success. Greenear eased her daughter and granddaughter onto the straw mattress, propped Blue Water's head up with a stack of folded blankets, and placed a warm fur blanket over them. As Blue Water gazed down into that tiny, scrunched-up face with its toothless clown mouth, she said a silent prayer to Spider Grandmother. Let this one live. The first baby Blue Water had given birth to had never suckled. But this third woman did exactly what she was supposed to. Blue Water watched in astonishment as the baby's tiny jaw vibrated against her skin. How did we come into the world knowing what to do? Why were there things we must already know, and other things we must learn, and yet more things we must learn again and again? What even was consciousness? Where did it reside? Then she remembered the necklace. She untied it from her neck and placed it upon her daughters. Blue Water began to weep for joy at the healthy baby, for grief at her missing husband, with relief that despite her fears, she wasn't doomed to only give birth to dead or dying babies. The animal warmth of the infant was a holy thing, like the night sky. She suspected they were connected, the sky and childbirth, the moon and consciousness. She considered this until she just couldn't think anymore. Blue Water yawned, and her eyelids fluttered, and she felt herself melting like tallow into the soft bed. You sleep, said Frogwoman, patting Blue Water on the shoulder. Greenear leaned over and kissed her daughter and granddaughter, and there were tears in her eyes, too. Blue Water sank into dreams in which Spider Grandmother whispered the secrets of time and space and life itself and consciousness. She had this dream before, but Blue Water would not remember it. So that's our introduction to the family. Thank you. Very kind, very kind. We'll do a little more. Meet Don Juan de Oñate. My mom's family descended for 3 people on that expedition. So it's crazy that I have a 24-year-old son, and now I'm making him leave the house with his passport all the time. You know, because of the times we live in, where we have a guy, Stephen Miller, whose family got to the U.S. in 1903, who would think that my son didn't belong here. All right, Juan de Zaldívar. This is not Oñate, but we're seeing Oñate through his nephew's eyes. Juan de Zaldívar, 1598. Captain Sergeant Major Vicente de Zaldívar, 25, threw his head back and laughed at his uncle's joke. It was not a funny joke. Of course it wasn't. Nothing that ever escaped the esteemed mouth of Don Juan de Oñate, 53, ever was particularly clever as far as Vicente was concerned. For the handsome young Spanish nobleman, laughing, like all means of contrived flattery he wielded without mercy against his unsuspecting uncle, was strategic. "Oh, Governor, stop," he said, over the din of the 24 or so other guests seated around the enormous formal dining table. "Honestly, you're just too much." The feast was taking place on the evening of January 29th in the year of our Lord 1598 at Oñate's opulent hacienda near the family's silver mines in the hills of Santa Barbara, Mexico. The magnificent home had been built by his father, the truly great conquistador Cristobal de Oñate. Juan had merely inherited it. Everyone knew this, but they also admired and feared the accompanying wealth the son had found dropped into his soft lap with his father's demise. And so they all treated him as though he were his father's equal, despite all evidence to the contrary. Elon Musk. Sorry. Both sons of mining magnates. As I was researching Oñate, I'm like, we've been here before. We know his personality. All right. The guests this evening were the nobles of New Spain, dressed in a dazzling array of sumptuous clothes, their jewels glittering in the yellow-orange blaze of torchlight. They were assembled in celebration of their host finally having, after a 2-year delay, received the go-ahead from the Viceroy to begin leading a northward expedition into New Mexico. All who gathered here now, with the insignificant exceptions of the servants and slaves, of whom it was debatable whether the term person applied at all, were also pretending to find their host, Oñate, not only hilarious, but also insightful, brave, without rival, the most admirable man who ever lived. Oñate, lacking the abilities and mettle of his genuinely admirable but unfortunately deceased father, was not yet a governor and might never be. But he desired very greatly to become one, to prove himself the equal of his father. Oñate enjoyed it when people called him governor, though he was not one yet. And so Vicente used the word as often as he could. "I mean it, governor," said Vicente. "You'll keep us all laughing so long we won't be able to finish this delicious and generous feast." Oñate was 6 feet tall, an unusual height for a man, and this 5 to 6 inch advantage over other males was one of the few things he had going for him other than his wealth. He remained standing at the head of the table, his eyes loosely focused upon some point high on a distant wall. He wore a bright yellow fitted short doublet and matching short breeches, both made of richly embroidered silk and puffy at the shoulder and thigh. His face, which had, according to himself anyway, been considered the perfect face by a famous artist he'd known in his youth, was still symmetrical and pleasing, though the nose, which was long, had grown in much the same downward curling pattern as a cat's claw. The tip of it jabbed into his dark mustache, which itself was attached around the mouth to a great length of beard. He wore bright white stockings, his strong legs being visible from the knee down, white polished buckle shoes, and a round white cape made of some sort of shiny black velvet with a flat collar. He had a showy lace ruff around his neck and a large floppy velvet hat, dyed the same yellow as the pantalettes. the greater portion of which drooped over his right ear. He was still in good form physically, with just the smallest protuberance of the belly starting to strain a doublet, and carried himself with the vigor of a much younger man. "Quite right, nephew, quite right," he said. He smiled at Vicente with a vulnerable fatherly affection of the type you only found in aspiring conquistadors after the liberal administration of alcohol. "Quite right. I'll stop being so entertaining so that you may all resume your feast. You must eat, most of all. You'll need your strength tomorrow, but first, a toast." Oñate thrust his golden goblet up, its stem wrapped in his small fist. Drops of red wine bled over its edges and fell onto his plate. He did not notice due to inebriation. The previous 4 or 5 full goblets, long since having made their journey down the man's throat, had given his face a pink and jolly glow, and his eyes an unsteady warmth that Vicente had seen quickly turn to violence if someone dared to question him. "To the good health of King Philip II, may God protect him." "Hear, hear," said the guests, going along with the toast as though it were the first time they'd heard it, even though it was the second time Oñate had made it in less than an hour. "Now eat, enjoy." "Thank God he's finally gonna shut up," whispered Juan de Zaldívar, Vicente's older brother, who was seated to Vicente's left. He spoke from behind his own golden goblet so that his lips might not be read by their uncle. Vicente continued with his exaggerated grin, but widened his eyes a little towards his brother to indicate that he shared Juan's sentiment but would never be so foolish as to let it show. It was a warning of sorts for his brother to play by the rules, to focus on long-term gain rather than satisfying his immediate impulses, something Juan, who sat with his legs quite far apart and leaned his head at a sarcastic angle, wasn't very good at. Vicente's attempt to rein him in only made Juan laugh. It was a real laugh. Upon catching him in this act, Oñate assigned the blame for the young man's merriment squarely upon himself. He gloated in this and regarded Juan with a moist sort of emotion that was honestly an embarrassment to behold. "I am so blessed," said Oñate, "so blessed. Lord God in heaven, I praise you for such blessings as I have in my family and friends." He repeated this bit about being blessed again, louder, and then proposed yet another toast to his holy and brave expedition, which would be leaving for lands unknown to the north tomorrow morning. The guests cheered and drank, and finally, at long last, Oñate lowered himself unsteadily back down into his fancy chair and began to dab the wine off his dinner at the corner of the tablecloth. "How will we manage months and months of this in the wide open wilderness with him?" Juan asked Vicente, discreetly whispering without moving his mouth, and in fact appearing to be knifing a blue roasted rabbit into it. "With the help of Almighty God, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and the Spanish crown, of course," said Vicente, and it was everything they could do not to burst out laughing again. To control themselves, the brothers directed their full attention to the food. The table was absolutely packed with platters of it, enough to feed an army, though no nobleman in his right mind would feed any army so well. The food, naturally, had been prepared by Indian slaves, but there was no Indian food included, for it was well known that to eat their food was to risk becoming dog-skinned and primitive, as they were. Rather, it was a Spanish meal fit for a king. There were roasted meats of many kinds: beef, pork, lamb, venison, wild boar, chicken, turkey, duck, goose, partridge, and even delicacies like peacock and small songbirds, some of them extremely tiny. A whole suckling pig was the impressive centerpiece of the table, but all of the platters were artfully arranged. There were soups, both cold and hot, and salads of fresh greens and herbs from the hacienda's gardens, and small plates of marinated vegetables, including a great quantity of olives imported from the motherland. To round things out, there was, of course, bread of many types, crusty and warm, fresh from the oven, and an endless stream of excellent wine. The brothers gorged themselves until they were unable to consider taking another bite. Soon, the other guests were also sufficiently stuffed, and it was announced by one of Oñate's servants that he required them to move to the largest of the drawing rooms for entertainment. With a great deal of huffing and groaning, the guests rose and moved. The drawing room was bedecked in a great many fine oil paintings and tapestries, with enormous doors that were flung open. Beyond them was a wrought iron balcony overlooking the estate's vineyards. A screen divided the room in half. The ladies sat upon pillows in their half, while the men took chairs on theirs. A string trio at the farthest end of the balcony performed familiar works by the acclaimed composer Diego Ortiz, and the men smoked cigars. After a bit of polite conversation with those seated near them, the Zaldívar brothers huddled together to whisper, turning their attention, as they so often did, to their favorite brotherly endeavor, the competitive conquest of women and girls. "Any of them strike your fancy?" asked Juan. "Well, there's one I had some months ago when we also stayed here," said Vicente. He was referring to a servant girl who now kept mostly to the kitchen and trembled when she spotted him. "I thought you said she put up a fight last time," said Juan. "She did, but trust me, after the beating I gave her, she won't make that mistake again." "Nonetheless, where's your spirit of adventure?" asked Juan. "You've been there, done that, try something new." "Yes, I suppose you're right," said Vicente. "Did you see Uncle's new girl?" "The young one?" asked Juan. "Indian?" "Yes, plump too." "She do," said Juan. "I've had my eye on her too." "I call dibs," said Vicente. If he hadn't been decided before, hearing that his brother was interested cemented this choice. This new girl couldn't have been more than 11 or so, the perfect age for virgins. Also timely, right? She had a wide-eyed innocence about her that was intriguing, attentive, and servile, with just a hint of growth at the breasts he liked about in a girl. "That's fine," said Juan. "I received earlier an invitation to visit the young widow Doña Maria de González in her private quarters." "Oh, did you?" Vicente was surprised. The widow was one of the more beautiful Spanish women in Santa Barbara, and childless, with a great deal of money. She was said to have poisoned her husband and carried on with various men as she pleased. She gave large sums of money and lavished gifts upon her favorites. What can I say? She has good taste. But she's used goods, said Vicente, who in truth was quite envious. Why had the widow not invited him? He was better looking than his brother, wasn't he? He wasn't as tall, sure, nor as strong. And women placed great value on these shallow things. What's the fun in a used woman? I didn't say I wanted to marry her brother. The woman I plan to marry is upstairs right now with her governess. Vicente knew Juan was referring to Maria, Oñate's daughter with his wife, the wealthy heiress Isabel de Tolosa Cortés de Moctezuma. Isabel was the granddaughter of Moctezuma and the daughter of Hernán Cortés. Her daughter, Maria, the object of the Zaldívar brothers' marriage lust, was 8 years old that evening. The ultimate showdown between brothers would be in winning her hand in a year or two, once she was old enough. Do not talk about my future wife, said Vicente. Keep her name out of your mouth. I did not use her name, brother, said Juan, but now I will. Maria is going to marry me. You know that. I do not. What I know is you're wasting yourself inside a used woman later. Hardly, said Juan. Experience in a beautiful widow is a fine thing, in my view. You can lean back and let her do all the work. Well, I wouldn't know, so I'll refrain from having an opinion on the matter, said Vicente, his anger rising. Besides which, a real man can make any woman do all the work. Yes, but have you seen the widow's eyes? They're the brightest blue, brother. Not one to be outdone, Vicente summoned his page, who stood along the wall behind him with the rest of the servants, by snapping his fingers. Yes, your lordship, asked the attendant young vassal. Bring me the young Indian girl, the new servant. You've seen her? Yes, your lordship. Not here, of course. Convey her to my quarters, and have her cleaned and perfumed and waiting for me. Yes, of course, your lordship, said the page, an Indian whose name was Rodrigo or Ricardo or Rigoberto. Vicente did not remember which it was, and it did not matter. Vicente had grown accustomed to the name of his previous page and often referred to this new one by the old one's name, which was Fernando. But in truth, that also did not matter. As long as these people did what they were told, their names were of no consequence. Vicente gripped the page's arm to stop him from leaving, as he had one last thing to tell him. I say, Fernando, to avoid the disruptive issues we had with the last one, the one scurrying about in the kitchen like a whipped dog now, please remind this one of her place and duty, and advise her in advance of the consequences of her resistance, said Vicente. Be as blunt as you deem necessary. The valet seemed to wince a little, which was a curious thing, but not important enough to merit following up with anything more. Yes, your lordship, he said, as you wish. So that's the two worlds that are coming, that are colliding. We have, and I know people think, oh, you're exaggerating. I am not. I guarantee you, I read these men's diaries. They were brutal. They were rapists many times. Not all of them. But that massacre at Acoma, there was a genocide that was committed in Acoma. It was when Juan de Zaldívar, no, Vicente de Zaldívar went to Acoma. They were the Spaniards were raiding the Pueblos in the winter and taking all their blankets. And it took a long time to make blankets. They had to make the thread. They took all their food, all their stored food, and all their blankets. They felt it's called the encomienda system. So it was almost like feudalism. They felt they were entitled to just take whatever they wanted. And they went there, and one of these brothers raped the daughter of the matriarch, someone very important in Acoma. And the people of Acoma responded by throwing him off Sky City. And he fell to his death. If you've ever been to Acoma, it's very high up. They threw him and some others. And other men in that raid, the Spanish raid, went back to Oñate and reported what had happened. And Oñate said to the other brother, go take your revenge for your brother. So they returned and killed almost everybody. They locked people in the kivas and set them all on fire because they were held accountable for a rape. Now, I was trying to get my mind around the Tewa world. The Tewa world at the time the Spaniards arrived was very, in my opinion, very advanced. Psychologically, emotionally, culturally, astronomically, as far as ruling things, art, everything, very advanced. It was matriarchal and matrilineal. And this idea, well, I'll put it this way. Cultures name things and places after what's important to them. So you'll notice the Puebloan people named places after the natural world. So it's where rabbits gathered. It's what's there. It's descriptive, but it's also honoring what's there. Place of the red willows. There are cities that had extremely long names. The actual name for Bandelier, what we know as Bandelier, was really long and very involved. The Spaniards come along and rename everything after religious figures or cities elsewhere, but mostly it's about Catholicism. So keep in mind when they show up, it's, the Inquisition is in full effect. So I hesitate when people say, oh, the Spanish came and it was racism, because they're looking at the Spanish Inquisition in New Mexico through a lens of a U.S. presentism lens of African chattel slavery in the United States. They kind of superimpose that over it. And it's not exactly accurate because the Spaniards were doing the same thing to people in Spain who weren't of the same religion that they were, right? And the caste systems were very complex, the identity systems. You could buy your Spanishness if you were indigenous, if you had enough money, things like that. So it was very complicated by comparison. But it was the Inquisition. So there was no tolerance for, it was my way or the highway. You convert or you die. That was it. Whereas the Tewa and the other Puebloan people had a cosmology that was about relativism, about listening to others and learning from them, about being confident in your own beliefs, confident enough that you can accept that someone else believes something different. That was their worldview for thousands of years. And that everything lived in harmony together. They were very focused on the natural world, how it worked. They were not central to the natural world, they were part of it. Whereas Christianity teaches us that human beings are central and we're here to have dominion over the natural world. So I'm just trying to understand. We know all of this now. They didn't. These two groups are meeting for the first time and trying to understand each other with these very, very different worldviews. And I think that's why it took so long for the Pueblo Revolt, which actually didn't take that long, but it was 100 years because there was this kind of disbelief, like, how can people be like this? How can people be so mean, so absolutely cruel and self-centered and focused on money? So I think we have a lot to learn, especially here in New Mexico. And I'm not saying Puebloan culture was perfect. The matriarchal thing was not perfect. I addressed that in the book too. The Hopi in particular are so rigid in the matrilinealism that a child who is adopted into the Hopi culture, a girl child who is not from a Hopi mother, will never be Hopi, but her brother, if he marries a Hopi woman, will be. So I had to kind of address that too. But it's super fascinating for me to think about that and imagine what that world was like. I am a little woo-woo, as you mentioned. I had a near-death experience in 2015, and it changed how I see everything. I went somewhere else, and that somewhere else is all about harmony, balance, and love. It just is. Source is love. And I felt with this book more than any other, I'm not going to say divine guidance, but I did feel like I was channeling at times other people's stories that have been hanging out in the sky in New Mexico, waiting to be heard. So I don't take credit for a lot of it. So that is where Rabbits Gathered. I don't know if you have any questions about this book or the writing of it, or yes, thank you.
Have you found anybody else who writes like that book? And then you said you're going to make more volumes to finish the story. But is that also because you want to go back to that kind of writing too?
And give it back to you.
Okay. Oh, you want to?
Just-
Did you guys hear the question?
Want to repeat the question?
Can you repeat it? Do you want to?
So I had asked you if other people had wrote books similar to yours, and you said no. But then I also wanted to know. You said that you were going to write more volumes about more daughters to finish the series, but I wanted to know if you also wanted to get back to that style of writing.
Yes, and as the writer, I don't feel it's that different from my other books because I'm just telling a story, but it's the marketing part that makes these different. And then I get it. You want to know what you're going to get. Brands matter and everything. But yeah, I want to show a few things. Like many of the people who consider themselves Hispano in New Mexico, Hispanic, are quite native when you check DNA, but are horrified to hear that. Many of them. There's a lot of there are historical reasons for that, why you would teach your children to deny their heritage, because to embrace it would be to die. It's kind of like the crypto Jewish population of New Mexico who came and continued to practice some Jewish things, but hid it. After many generations, you forget that you were Jewish. And it doesn't mean you're ashamed of it necessarily. So it's complex. So I want to show a couple things. and the book series will end in modern times. But in the next volume, I want to show how the Hispanicization of indigenous people in New Mexico begins in earnest. But with nuance, because I think a lot of times we assume there are the conquerors and the conquered just conform to everything. But Catholicism in New Mexico is very syncretic. There are a lot of indigenous traditions, styles, beliefs, and same with Mexico. The Virgin of Guadalupe is really the syncretic embodiment of Tonantzin, the corn goddess, So we have a lot of that in New Mexico too. So what I'm trying to show is that conquered people, as they're called, as we're called, are not helpless. They're not just simply forgetting who they were. They are ingenious about finding ways to retain what they have secretly. And that is often done by the women, and it's done through stories. It's done below the radar of the priests and the men who are dominating everything, because they assume that in this time period anyway, that women don't matter or know anything anyway. It's in the lullabies, it's in the song, those comanchitos. It's in the food preparation, the tortillas, and the things that people call Spanish food in New Mexico. It is actually Puebloan food. So that's what I want to show. And for me, it's a form of hope in a way, that not just hope that colonized people persevere in these ways, but hope that we are people, and at the end of the day, everybody's coming to something with their own limitations and their own baggage. But here in New Mexico, I think we've done something remarkable that I would love to see the rest of the US understand, which is we don't have a dominant culture here or a majority population here, and we are fine with that. And we all see, many of us, not all of us. My Uncle Eddie's another story. So I want to show the beautiful ways that traditions survive and also combine, but not gloss over. I want to show nuance so I'm going to put it in psychological terms. I think in contemporary US culture right now, we're all suffering from this psychological coping mechanism that you see sometimes in people with personality disorders, which is, it's called splitting. So little kids, when they get inconsistent parenting, sometimes your parents are great, sometimes they're awful. They're unable, when you're young, you're unable to hold in your mind that mom can be both good and bad. So you create two. You have good mom and you have bad mom. It's subconscious. So how this manifests in adults, and I have plenty of people in my own family like this, maybe you know some people like this. As long as you're doing what they like and you're pleasing them, you're the best person in the world. But the second you do something they don't like, you're dead to them. I see the cancel culture on both sides being a sort of a society-wide version of that, where we are forgetting that good people can do bad things sometimes. Bad people can do good things sometimes. Many of us are neither good nor bad. We are all of those things all the time. Then that we need to learn to hold two seemingly opposed truths to both be true at the same time. And we in the United States have gotten very bad at that. We've gotten very bad. We've gotten very good at good guys and bad guys. But reality and history is not like that. So that's my goal. This book is like a love letter to New Mexico, and sort of a gentle wish that my nation would take a lesson from what we have done here. We don't bad others so much here. We kind of coexist too, I think. I don't live in Alamo, maybe it's different here. But up in Belen, it's everybody kind of is okay with everything, and we love our New Mexican food, right? We love our Rochelle, this mountain where we're from. We love the monsoons and the mountains and the adobe, this building. You know, the adobe style, the Puebloan style, that was pioneered by women. Puebloan women were the architects, the engineers, and the home builders. Still are. That was their job. So all of those things have carried me on. But like I said, in later books, because it's based on my own family, my Irish grandmother died without realizing that her husband was Mexican. Like, she just didn't know. Like, I've researched of what she would call Mexican. But he's got a line of his family tree that is this long. You know, but they eventually married into the Conant line, which is, so I'm descended, I don't know if you know, Roger Conant was one of the founding fathers. He founded Salem, Massachusetts, and Harvard University. So that's our family name on this. But they were also Oñates.
I'm not sure. Not quite sure how to ask this. I just want you to continue talking about how you learned the genealogy of your own family and how you imaginally inhabit that. I mean, going back 24 generations, that's huge because there is no there's nothing left. It has to be an act of imagination. There, I mean, there are diaries at some point, but yeah, I want to hear all about that.
I love that question. We get into this later in the book. Okay, so there were definitely letters and diaries, lots and lots of them, and they're in the various libraries and in the possession of the state of New Mexico. And there were books written about those. And there are lots of people, like the state historians, who actually do know a lot about that. I'm lucky in that my father founded the New Mexico History and Sociology program at UNM. So I grew up with a lot of this stuff. He would take me out on the weekends to different little towns and teach me about the town's history. In the case of Oñate, it's actually kind of funny. There were other explorers of his era who brought scribes along with them to write these wonderful epic nonfiction, but like novels almost, about how amazing they were and how great their explorations were. So he hired one whose last name is Villagra. It looks like Villagra. And he came along and chronicled the trip, and it ends up as a book. So there is actually a book written about the whole Oñate expedition when they got here. And it's widely regarded as one of the worst pieces of literature ever written in the Spanish language, and one of the most dishonest. So he recounts Oñate finding the Cibola and the 7 cities of gold. None of that happened. So there I'm seeing another parallel with Elon Musk and Don Juan de Oñate. Elon Musk buys a whole social media platform to push his, often fictitious worldview. And Don Juan de Oñate did the same. He used his money to hire a guy to follow him around, a little sycophant, to write his imagined, story of self. But as far as the indigenous side, that was, much of this is the relationships between and among people are imagined. I don't know that these people existed with those names, those women. Even when the Spaniards in my family tree, and I have one of those great aunts who is the genealogist, who has done a lot of footwork, and Ancestry.com is actually pretty great. It allowed me to do a lot of that and connect family trees that already existed and trace this back. I did not know when I started writing this book that I was related to people in the Oñate expedition. I didn't know that. I knew there was a Marques somewhere back, but I didn't think it was that far back, and it is. But many of the oral traditions of the Tewa stayed similar enough, and the world has stayed similar enough that I can make educated guesses about what life would have been like there then. So I did extensively interview people who specialize in Puebloan history, anthropologists, archaeologists, historians, also Roxanne Swensel, who has the Puye Center up in Pojoaque, where she tries to revive many of the traditions and traditional ways of life. Talking to her, reading her work, and there was also, I'm really embarrassed that I'm forgetting her name. Look at it. It was a so-called Anglo woman, I guess, who came in the much later than this takes place, but around the turn of the last century, and was appalled that men who were in the area, like who seemed to be experts, were not listening to people's stories and writing them down, and she wrote them all down. So there's books of Tewa tales and folk stories that she wrote down. It's an incredibly valuable collection that gives me a sense of the world they lived in. I spent a lot of time at Puye, just sitting and sort of imagining, sitting inside the homes, walking around up there different times of the year, imagining what it would be like to live there, knowing how many people live there at the height of it. And in the book, the Spaniards come quite soon and disrupt life, and people start having to scatter. So this family ends up living also at what is now Pecos, which then was called Sicuye. So there is a lot of history for those places that I did not know about, that I learned about and just blew my mind. I don't know if you've ever been to Pecos Pueblo. That town was remarkable before contact. It was a walled village. They had an army, I guess. But the word for warrior that they had was protector or lookout. It wasn't warrior. It wasn't someone looking for war. It was people just protecting, defending. So that stereotype of the bloodthirsty Indian is completely false. It's completely projection. Most people, when you try to take their house and their stuff, they're gonna want it back, you know. But if you feel entitled to take those things, you'll perhaps see them wanting their stuff back as being a raid. I don't know. But the part I loved about it that still carries on as the state fair, you know, in the fall, is they would have these big autumnal trading festivals at Taos, at Pecos, where the Plains people would come. And, you know, people would come from what we now call Mexico, people coming from all over the place to trade goods. And in the area I live in, it was Abo, you know, the Abo ruins and the Colrai ruins and the salt beds. So salt is what we had that people really wanted. So I had a lot of fun imagining, you know, Pecos in its prime, how beautiful that area is, how exciting it must have been every fall when all of these different people from different places came and set up their camps in the big field. And people traded with each other, you know. Yeah, so a lot of it was imagination, but I'm a journalist at heart. I started in journalism, and I really need to have, I feel it's important to have a factual basis for everything I describe. The meals, the clothes, the way they would have given a toast, the way they talk, all of those details are things that I investigated to make sure that I was getting it right. So hopefully it just reads like a scene, but a lot of work went into, you know, creating that scene. Yeah. And I'm just making the assumption that people are people and love is, you know, still love, and people still get nervous and giddy and they fight and get annoyed when their kids do whatever kids do. So, yeah. All right, well, I didn't have many copies of the book on hand, only 4 of them because my order didn't come in.
I ask a question?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought we were done. Okay.
So how did you get introduced to Pueblo culture? And where I lived in the Española Valley for 20 years. And I miss the Norteños and I miss the Tewas very much. And it was really a transforming experience to live there. And I arrived there because of work. I spent a lot of time traveling, installing telephone equipment. So how did you get introduced to the Tewa culture and other Pueblo cultures?
Yeah, good question. I focus on Tewa at first here, because we're starting there, and then moved to Tewa and Towa and some Karasin and Apache. I think maybe by virtue of what my dad did for a living, it was just kind of always something I knew about. But when I was researching my own family tree, and I discovered that my great-grandmother on my mom's side, her father's mother, who was Barbarita Marquez, was from Antonchico, which is near Las Vegas. And when I looked at her pictures of her, there are a few of them left, and learned more about her story, it became pretty evident to me that she was from Pecos. Like her family originally was from that area. And it was also when I did my 23andMe, when we do your DNA swab, I didn't expect with my background that there would be much indigenous background for me. And there's not a lot. It's like 3% for me. So they estimate it's 8 generations back was the last, wholly Puebloan person in my family. And that's probably on my mom's side, which would surprise them because my mom's side are white identifying. They've been anglicized, white identifying. So it was just a process. My father's actually from the nation of Cuba, Havana, Cuba, and came to the U.S. as a 15-year-old. So I think too, my interest in New Mexico, he found it really interesting as a person from a different Latin American country. He always kind of taught me that New Mexico is in many ways a Latin American country. Our history, when you teach American history, it's usually the East Coast and the English, and then, New Mexico gets incorporated around 1848, 1912. We don't ever really learn much of what happened before that. And what happened before that was almost identical to what happened in Cuba in some ways. So that was really interesting. Many of the same priests, that were hanging around Santa Fe and what's now Los Alamos, were also working in Venezuela, right? So New Mexico has a lot in common with Latin American history. So I found that very interesting. Having that perspective was helpful for me. And also, many people don't know this. I actually didn't even know this till I started researching the book. I said, why did I not know this? And you probably do, but New Mexico, people assume New Mexico was named New Mexico when the U.S. took possession of it from Mexico. That what we know as the modern nation of Mexico, but that's not the case. Oñate was obsessed with Hernan Cortez, who was his dad's buddy, because Cortez conquered Mexica, which is the Aztec city-state that is now Mexico City. That's what he conquered. And there was a lot of gold there. And he became famous for all the riches that he brought back to Spain and for conquering Montezuma. He was really quite lauded in his time. That area was called Mexico, but it was small in comparison to what we think of today as Mexico. What we think of today as Mexico was hundreds of other indigenous nations and language groups, right? I think, I have to look it up, but Mexico recognizes something like 85 different indigenous languages in Mexico today. So when Oñate gets here, he thinks he's going to replicate what Hernan Cortez did. He's going to outdo Cortez and his dad. You know, he's going to prove that he's the man. But he's not. He's squishy. He's dumb. You know, he's just not this guy. He's not the guy. He wants to be the guy. So he lands in El Paso, you know, that area. When he crosses in, he puts his little flag in the ground and calls this the Kingdom of New Mexico. And he has heard from native people. He comes here and he's like, I'm looking for gold. And they're just like, cool, it's over there. There's a ton of gold up 7 cities. Just keep going. Just get away from us, you know. And he's so naive and also so patronizing. He doesn't think that they could possibly be smart enough to just be lying to him. And he continues on his way. But yeah, what's amazing is the Manso. Manso means friend. You know, it's the group of people who lived and live, the first people of the El Paso region. So that was kind of a horrific meeting, which I, you know, describe in this book too. I've wanted to do a walk. I'm waiting until it's cooler. I want to walk from El Paso to Santa Fe. And not all at once, but little pieces at a time. And just stop in those places where my 3 ancestors did awful things. And just apologize. Spain has never apologized formally for what it did in the Americas. And, you know, by some estimates, 100 million indigenous people died due to colonization by different European countries. That's a lot of people. A lot of people. And 50% of people in the US still think that Native Americans don't exist anymore. Which is amazing too. Most people, when we associate, oh, he looks Mexican, that person looks Indigenous American. Because the majority population of Mexico is mestizo, the indigenous population. So it's just incredible to me. I mean, we're living in a time in the US where it's like, you look like you don't belong here. Actually, that is not true. The original inhabitants of this place look like the people that ICE is racially profiling. Which is insane. And Spanish is not a native language to this land. And that, you know, the US be like, Spanish, sure, it's another European language, friend. Like, what are you so upset about? Anyway, we're living through times that make me a little bit sad. Okay. Oh, did you do much? Thank you for applauding. I saw it.
Were you writing this book?
2 years, maybe 2 years. And I apologize. There are still typos in it because I don't have an editing team. I have my mom, I have my son. They did what they could. But I will be reissuing a second edition of this with those typos corrected. So
Your first added for you.
Oh!
Great editor.
yes, I would love that. If anybody who sees problems with it, I saw a couple as I was reading. I haven't wanted to look at it again because I start seeing things I want to change, but it needs a little tightening.
So it seems like people, a lot of projects juggling at the same time. Is that accurate?
It seems like people, a lot of projects juggling at the same time. Yeah, too many. I need to pare back.
Because that's astonishing. I was 3 books this year, and write 4 dense, important substance. I'm just blown away by how much content and it's, you know, informed, but it's really important. So thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that. I will say one of my agents used to be the head of the Collins division at HarperCollins. And he told me I was the fastest writer he'd ever met, like in almost 30 years in the business. My first book, The Dirty Girl Social Club, I wrote in 11 days. I go into a weird fugue state and I just sit. It's the thing I love doing the most in the world, and it's very sad because it's not good for you to sit in one place for like 18 straight hours staring like a zombie. But that's what I do and I love. And the weird thing about it, and people say, well, how did you learn to write so fast? I'm going to tell you how I did it because I swear this is what it is. My undergraduate degree is in jazz performance on the tenor saxophone. I'm a saxophonist. I started playing when I was 9 because I thought saxophones were pretty, and my cousin had one. He didn't want it anymore, and I fell in love with it. And I went to jazz camp when I was in high school in Albuquerque. I went to jazz camp up in Telluride, Colorado, and found out about Berklee College of Music in Boston, And when I was 16, I started my own, jazz quartet that played at like brunch, gigs in Albuquerque on the weekends. So I took it really seriously. But when you learn to improvise in jazz, and I was a performance major, improvising isn't just randomly playing notes. It's actually really focused, laser-focused, spontaneous composition. But you have to understand and learn the rules of harmony and melody inside and out, the way a classical composer would or anyone else. The cycle of fifths and the different scales that go over what chords and how the chord progression works together and which scales are going to work together. And you practice that enough and do that enough, and it's your fingers, which is what you use to type. So I'm not saying I'm a great jazz saxophonist. I was okay. I'm okay at it. There are better people than me, but they train my brain to work a certain way. So when I write while I'm hiking now, and I have playlists. I'm an auditory learner. I listen to audiobooks a lot. I love audiobooks. Well, ones that are well done. So I visualize stories in musical shape and color and tone, as weird as that sounds. And I'll work out a lot of the details and memorize the structure and the characters' relationships to each other and commit it to memory while I hike and walk, because I feel like that brings blood to the brain somehow. So that by the time I sit down to write, it's almost like a trance. It's very strange. And I do it with all of these Substacks too. Like I'm just thinking all the time. It makes me a really awful friend. But like, I love thinking about stuff and putting patterns together and just seeing things in new ways. I loved journalism. I fell into journalism because when I was at Berkeley, the student body was only 15% roles. And I thought that was weird because Juilliard and Eastman and New England Conservatory, it was like 50-50. And we were treated really badly. This is in the late 80s, early 90s. And it made me mad. And I wrote about it. I wrote about what was happening at Berklee College of Music. And I sent it to the Boston Globe. And this is right when Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas, all that stuff was happening. And the Globe fact-checked everything, and they published it on a Sunday, right before I graduated. And the school changed all these things. Like, I had gone through 2 years of Western music history and never heard the name of one woman, not one, for 2 years. And at the end of it, I was actually very shy back then, but I asked the teacher, Mr. LeClaire, this is 2 years of the history of all of Western music. You've not named one woman. And this is in the Berklee Performance Center. It was a huge class, and he's on stage, a very important man. And he says, Miss Valdez, that's because I teach history as pertains to the greats, and there have been no women greats. I remember thinking, that can't be right. But we didn't have internet then, so I started marching down to the Copper Square Library and researching with the librarian. and I find Clara Schumann, and I find Fanny Mendelssohn, and I find Hildegard de Bingen, Saint, who actually was a composer. There were lots of women greats. I get a stack of 3x5 cards. I start leaving notes in his box every day with the birth date, death date, and pertinent facts and compositions of the women greats. And then I write this article saying that happened and he was wrong. And I've just always been that person. And I think it might be a little bit of autism, maybe ADHD, but also gifted. Like my son's very gifted, and there's this sort of crusading justice thing, even when it's stupid that we do, when it's socially not the smartest move you can make, I make it anyway. So the school saw the article, they added a women in music history class. They carpeted the practice room walls and were covered with misogynist graffiti. That's when I decided to be a journalist. I'm like, my first job out of Berkeley was playing tenor sax in a lounge band on a cruise ship, Carnival cruise ship. I played for a review for a ventriloquist who was drunk, so his mouth movement was awful. I was sick all the time. He's up there, he's like, what do you think? I don't know, what do you think? You're an awful ventriloquist. This is hell. This is actually hell. So I decided to become a journalist because you could change the world by telling people what's going on. And I'd always liked writing, but I didn't know I could make a living at it. So I went to Columbia Journalism School, and the Boston Globe hired me right out of Columbia to come back as the youngest staff writer there. And that also taught me to write fast and to write when I feel terrible. Because when writing's your job, you can't be like, I'm waiting for the muse. You're like, your deadline's at 4, you either get your story in or you don't keep your job. It's like, I'm sure lots of people wake up not wanting to be a plumber that day. You're a plumber that day anyway. And that's how I view writing. So I got into the habit of writing a lot in newspapers and not being precious about it, just getting it done, getting it out on time. But all of that has made it hard now because I do have so many different interests. Journalism is like constant grad school. Like you're always learning something new, and it's exciting, and I like that. But the book world wants you to be whatever you are and just that. Not only just are you a romance novelist, but you are a historical time travel romance novelist, and that is what you will do forever. And if you want to do something else, you'll have to use a different name So I do think my career has suffered because people who love me for one thing that I do or for one of the Substacks, they'll see an update for another thing that I do and they're like, I hate this. Like, who is this person? So I need to perhaps, I don't know, narrow it down or embrace it, just be like, I do all kinds of weird stuff. All right. Thank you. You guys,